I've been taking government for over 16 years and civic education also for some years now. I've been a NECO and WIFE examiner for over 10 years. I'm here to help you. In the last video, I promised to do a video on indirect rule, okay? So I'll do that today in this very video. Um, I've discussed the Northern Protectorate with you. I've discussed the Southern Protectorate. I've also, in a way, discussed colonialism, imperialism, mercantilism, and neocolonialism with you. So join me today as I discuss indirect rule with you. May I present the table to you in a moment? Okay, this is the government class with Oluwagbemi Benjamin. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel so that if any video comes up or a new video comes up from me, you will always get an alert. Thank you. I'm starting with indirect rule system. First of all, I must say that for objective reasons in WASC, in NECO, in JAMB, and whatever, another term for indirect rule system is dual mandate. Dual mandate, okay? Okay. And of course, you remember that the father of indirect rule is Sir Frederick Lugard, okay? Good. I also gave you the full name in the previous video. Kindly look for it, either under the Northern Protectorate or the Southern Protectorate. So look for the full name of Sir Frederick Lugard. So indirect rule policy, simply put, is the use of traditional institutions to govern the people, okay, under the close supervision of the colonial masters or under the close supervision of the whites. Okay, now that is a layman definition of indirect rule. Now let me give you this acceptable one. Indirect rule is a system of administration in which the British colonial government adopted as its colonial policy in dealing with the people by using the traditional rulers. Okay, indirect rule is a system of administration which the British colonial government adopted as its colonial policy in dealing with the people by using the traditional rulers. In the north, the emirs were used and some chiefs were used. In the south, warranty right. In the west, the kings were used and the chiefs. Okay, so the system where tradition is to govern the people is simply known as indirect rule, and it was introduced by Sir Frederick Lugard. I used indirect rule in India before he came to introduce it to Nigeria. Now, native authority. Native authority was an administration of indirect rule system in British West Africa. Okay, native authority, that is the traditional institution. Okay, the traditional institution comprising of the kings, warrant chiefs, the emirs, okay, the chiefs in the emirate kingdom, and etc. All of this put together constitute the native authority. Now let's look at this significant point. Now what I'm doing is I'm indirectly preparing you for WASC, NECO, IGMB, and etc. Okay, so this is government class. Let's move on. So main features or characteristics or constituents of indirect rule. Now, when we say features in government, we also mean characteristics, we mean the constituents of anything. So let's continue. So we said, what are the features or the characteristics or the main constituents of indirect rule? Number one is traditional rulers. The British used the traditional rulers to govern their people. They recognized the lordship, the authority of the traditional rulers and they used it to the best of their ability to govern the locals. Okay. Then number the British recognized the traditional system of government, and it was not dropped for their administration. You see, that is colonialism. In this case, they use the people to govern another. However, they get the larger share of whatever the proceed. And then the question is, why did they use the traditional rulers to do this? Now, like in the North, taxation was already in place, so it was not alien to the people. So they just used the people as a bait to get the tax from the subject, and then remit it to the British government. Now they recognized the customs and traditions of the people. Okay, they respected the people's culture, unlike in the case of the French policy, where the people's culture was undermined, where the traditional rulers were not recognized. Okay, we shall still get there. Maybe in the subsequent video, I'll do something on the French colonial administration in essentially West Africa. Okay, now the British officials, as at this time, were not conversant with the terrain of their colonies, so they had to employ the traditional rulers or some locals to help them in navigating their way. The village really helped them. Did you get that definition, that explanation of the British officials? The British officials were not conversant. They were not conversant with the terrain of Nigeria, so they needed the people already living there to help them in navigating their way, and that was what they did. Now they employed traditional rulers or the indirect rule to reduce cost of administration. As a matter of fact, yes, they introduced indirect rule in the North, right? But the North was not thriving like the Southern Protectorate, so they had to merge the Southern Protectorate and the Northern Protectorate together, so as to mitigate, or in a way, so as to measure up with the budget, the deficit they have in the North. Did you get what I just explained? Yeah. 1912, Sir Frederick Law Lugard was the governor of the Northern Protectorate and at the same time the Southern Protectorate. Okay, and then he merged them together. Okay, together, so that he could use the resources in the South, okay, to cover up for the deficit they have in the North. Okay, good. Number 7, native courts. The native courts in this case were dominated by the traditional rulers, by the warrant chiefs, and etc. And of course, they judged the people accordingly. They used the native courts to pass justice in the land. Now, reasons for the adoption of the system of indirect rule. Listen, the crux of this matter, the main nucleus why they introduced indirect rule, okay, was purely for economic reasons. And the whole essence is to use the traditional rulers to get taxes from their subject without any the colonial masters. But however, let's look at the other reasons. Here, I said the major reason for the adoption of indirect rule was for the purpose of local government along traditional lines, upon native courts and native authority ordinance. Okay, this is another one, but the main reason is for taxation. Now, this was the reason they gave, but the underlying factor behind the introduction of indirect rule was in order to get the taxes from the locals, from the people occupying the local areas. Number 2, lack of British personnel. As at that time, the British personnel were not that many, and so they needed the traditional rulers to help them, and then some natives to help them in the governance. Now, number 3, there was no sufficient fund, and so they needed fund from the natives. They use the traditional rulers, they use the warrant chief, they use others to get the money. Now, the poor climatic condition, you know that the African climatic condition, especially Nigeria, is harsh. Okay, and so for that, the many British were not even ready to come to Nigeria. So what did they do? They needed the locals to govern their people. Number five, to satisfy their economic needs, which is the main reason why they came. And then number six, the role and position of traditional rulers, which of course has been in place before they came, we were fully established. It was only in the east, that is the southern region, that the role of the obiship could not be properly explained. And then, and you know, Igbo community, that is Eastern community, is an egalitarian society. So we call it an acephalous community, headless community. Therefore, they needed some individuals that will help them to govern the the subject. And so that was why they appointed some individuals, made them chiefs, and then gave them certificate, which is called the warrant. And that was why we call them the warrant chiefs, right? And they constitute the native and at the same time, okay, so they ensure peace and harmony in their locality. Number seven, the success of the system in India, okay, gave them the courage to also introduce it in Nigeria. As at that time, there was a language barrier. Okay, many people could not speak English, and so they needed at least few individuals that could read their lips to help communicate the message to the locals. The British officials were few, and at the same time, they didn't understand the terrain, so they needed some locals, some Nigerians to help them through that problem. Then poor communication network. The road network was poor, okay, and at the same time, there was like we said, language barrier, road network, which was poor. They mostly go by water and etc. So to get into the interlands was very, very difficult. So they needed the indigenes to help them get into those places. Okay. That in 1900, the capital of the Northern Protectorate was in Lokoja, but in 1902, it was moved to Zungeru. And the main reason why the headquarters was moved to Zungeru was because Zungeru was one of the most cities which is accessible by water. So it made it easy for them. So all the areas that are not close to water, they have to go by land. And so there was a poor communication road networks there. And so they have to use the indigenes to help them get to those places. And also to ensure a stable political system. I remember when Frederick Lugard was to take over as the High Commissioner, he was expressly warned by the British Queen that he should not touch the people's religion. Okay, so should you have any question on this I've explained, kindly chat me up and I will respond to your question. Now, this is another heading because why could come up with any form, and so you should be able to answer it. Reasons why British government involved African traditional rulers in the colonial administration of West Africa. Why? It's still like the first one that we discussed, reasons. Okay, now look at what we discussed here earlier. We said reasons for the adoption of indirect rule system. You saw the points I gave, okay? And then we come here. Reasons why British government involved African traditional rulers in the colonial administration. Number one, it was very, 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 very economical. It was very, very, very economical. Okay, they spend less, they get more. Right, the British personnel on ground were very, very few because as at that time, like between the period of 1914 even to 1918, okay, during the first, were still fighting, and then they were still fighting in other places, so they didn't have sufficient personnel in Africa, right? And then past experience, indirect rule system has been used in India, and so that gave them the core, and it was very, very successful in India. So that gave them the courage to introduce it in Nigeria, right? Also for the collection of taxes, to make collection of taxes very easy. Now in Hausa Fulani pre-colonial administration, people were already used to paying tribute to the emir. And so when the whites came, it was very easy for them to just use the traditional rulers to get the money. Likewise, in the Yoruba pre-colonial administration, people were also used to paying taxes to the Alaafin of Oyo. But in the eastern region, reverse was the case. They don't pay tax to nobody. So when tax was introduced, it was alien to the people, and that was why the indirect rule policy in the East was a total failure. We shall still get there. Then the status of the traditional rulers. As at that time, people respect them, they take authority from them, they give them their honor, they give them their pride of place. People see them as like a demigod, like a small god, and so like it's second in command to God. It's just like Allah for you is popularly chanted with Allah Iku Baba Yeye Igbakeji Orisa. That is, whatever he says is like the final, is the second in command to God. The same way in the East, in the North, they respect their emirs so much. So that was another reason why indirect rule was introduced into our system. Then for political stability, since when they came, since people listened to their leaders, to their traditional rulers, it was not a big deal for them. So they just allow it to thrive like that. And then the traditional rulers were stooges. They were easily manipulated by the British, and so because of that, they were able to use them. Okay. And of course, it's important I tell you that any traditional ruler that was not ready to comply would be deposed. For instance, the Oba Kosoko of Lagos was deposed, right? And Oba Dosumu was imposed on the people, right? Oba Kosoko of Lagos, when they gave him the letter of protectorate, he rejected it. He told them to explain the details to him before he would assent to it. And when he understood it, he declined. He didn't sign it. And so for that, the British got angry and deposed him, and then imposed Oba Dosumu, who signed the treaty, the pact with the colonial masters, and 1861 Lagos became a colony. Okay, so I'll stop here anyway. Ways colonial rules contributed to the decline of the powers of the traditional rulers in West Africa. Ways colonial rules contributed to the decline of the powers of the traditional rulers in West Africa. Number one, collapse of existing links between the rulers and their subjects. Okay, the British came in between, and so the traditional rulers they had to dual mandate. They were responsible to their people and at the same time to the colonial masters. So the traditional rulers became appendages alien government. They were stooges to the alien government, and so the alien government could use them for any purpose. Right. Then there was introduction of salaried job to the working subjects, which made them become independent of their rulers. Okay. People began to go for white collar jobs, and then they didn't need to depend on their king or emir or anything again. So that reduced the power or the influence of the colonial masters, the traditional rulers, sorry. Then number three, impact of Western education. You know, many people, education brings light, okay, enlightens the people. So this led to the collapse of traditional norms and values of the society, because many people now could question the authority of their leaders. And this is one of the things that helped them in the East and also in the South, right? The people in the West, the people were able to question the authority of their leaders, okay, because they are well lettered, they are well read, they are educated. Okay, then influence of foreign religions scaled down the power of traditional rulers as the spiritual authority of the people. Those right? And in Christianity, there is liberalism. People believe in God instead of an individual. They trust in God instead of an individual. And so in this case, many people now tend to face their different means. Some became Islamic Muslims, while some were Christians, right? And some were no longer practicing traditional religion. And so that reduced the influence of the traditional rulers. Then number 5, the establishment of law courts by the colonialists also reduced the lawmaking functions of the traditional rulers. So cases are now being tried in the court, that is the native courts, instead of in the king's palace. And so this reduced the hegemony of the traditional rulers. Okay, let me add this for you. Roles played by the traditional rulers during the British colonial rule in Nigeria. Number 1, they preserved the culture and customs of the land. So the traditional rulers helped to preserve the culture and customs of their communities that were approved by the what? By the British. Okay? Tax assessment and collection. They help in tax assessment and at the same time collection for the colonial masters. They help the colonial masters to assess the tax, and at the same time they collect it and then give it to the colonial masters. Don't forget that I said that the traditional rulers were stooges to the stooges of the British colonial administrators. Also, policy of indirect rule, right? They took part in the colonial policy of indirect rule. Okay, law and order. The traditional rulers assisted the British in, of course, the order. They did that very well. Then lawmaking. The traditional rulers took part in lawmaking, as some of them were members of the legislative councils and later House of Chiefs. Okay, then in the case of Arthur Richard, right, who gave the House of Chiefs to the North, okay, as against the East and West, who had single legislative assembly. And he did that to compensate the North, saying that they were not included in the Hill Clifford administration, that he ruled in the North through proclamation. We shall still get there anyway. Now, they help to preside over native courts established by the British government. Another one is conscription of youths. The traditional rulers helped to conscript youths to perform forced labors and serve in the British Army during the World Wars. In fact, they fought in the World War II as well, right? And that's why under the nationalism, right to nationalism, we talked about the return of the ex-servicemen. And then number 8, they acted as a link, right? They acted as a link between the colonial masters and their people. And this is why we said that they perform dual mandate. They perform dual mandate. So I will stop here, and in another video, I will continue with more details on indirect rule so that you'll be able to digest this better. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then God will bless you. Thank you, and I wish you all the best and a good understanding in all you do in Jesus' name. Thanks, and bye for now.